It started like every other night at Steady Victoria Memorial Hospital, the kind of night that smelled like antiseptic, tired coffee, and rain that never quite reached the windows. The night shift was an ecosystem of its own. The fluorescent lights hummed like insomnia. Monitors blinked like city lights through fog. Somewhere between AM and dawn, the world outside disappeared, and all that was left was the sound of heartbeats and the whisper of wheels on linoleum. Ethan Ward was on his first week as a registered nurse. He wasn't new to exhaustion. Internships had taught him that, but this was different. Here, every step mattered. Every call light meant someone's fear. He clutched his clipboard like a lifeline and walked through the long hallway of the neurosurgical wing, pretending he didn't notice the way his hands trembled. His badge still looked too clean. His scrubs too new. He'd been warned that Dr. Mara Jensen, the attending surgeon for the night, didn't tolerate hesitation. "Ward, right?" The voice came from behind him, low, firm, unmistakably controlled. He turned. There she was, Dr. Jensen. Her presence was quiet but absolute, like a scalpel, sharp and precise. Late 30s, hair pulled into a loose bun that somehow made her look both professional and human. Her eyes were gray, not cold, but guarded, like they'd seen too much and learned not to flinch. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said quickly. "Ethan Ward, I was assigned to your rotation." She looked him over, not unkindly, just assessing. "You're early," he blinked. "Thought it would be better than being late." Her lips curved just slightly. "In this place, that's not always true. The night shift eats the early ones first." He almost laughed, but stopped himself when he saw her smile fade. It wasn't a joke. Not entirely. The pager at her waist beeped. She didn't even glance at it. "Trauma incoming. Bay 3, you're with me." Just like that, he was running beside her, the rhythm of her steps confident, surgical. She didn't slow for doors or hallways or questions. And somehow, without saying a word, she taught him the first lesson of the night. Pace means survival. The trauma doors burst open with a hiss of hydraulics. The sound of chaos hit him like a wave, voices overlapping, metal clanging, blood on white sheets. 26-year-old male, motorcycle collision, shouted a paramedic. BP 70/40, GCS 9, possible internal bleed. "Let's move," Mara ordered. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. People just moved. She took command like the world made sense only when she spoke. Ethan handed her instruments, checked vitals, wiped blood, and tried to breathe. It was brutal and beautiful all at once, the choreography of survival. For a moment, he forgot himself. He forgot the rules. He just watched her precise hands, calm voice, the gravity of someone who carried the weight of every decision and didn't let it crush her. "Ward," she said suddenly. He snapped back. "Yes, doctor? Keep your eyes on the patient, not on me. You'll have time to be impressed later." He flushed. "Yes, ma'am," but later never came. The patient coded. The monitor screamed. "Paddles," she said. "Charged." "Clear." Ethan felt the jolt in his bones when the defibrillator fired. Once, twice, flatline. "Time of death," she said softly. 03:22, and just like that, silence. The kind of silence that pressed against your chest until you couldn't breathe. She turned to Ethan. "This is the part no one prepares you for," she said. Her voice wasn't cold anymore. It was tired, human. "Go clean up. There'll be another one soon." Ethan nodded numbly. "Yes, doctor." She paused, watching him a second longer than she should have. "You did fine. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did." More than he wanted to admit. Later that night, after the chaos had ebbed, Ethan found himself in the hospital break room, staring at the vending machine's flickering light. He hadn't eaten since morning. He wasn't sure he could. Footsteps echoed. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "Didn't try." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "For what it's worth, you handled yourself better than most first-timers." He smiled faintly. "You don't seem like the type who gives out compliments." "I'm not," she said. "So don't get used to it." For a moment, they just stood there, two exhausted souls orbiting each other in sterile light, bound by something neither of them could name. When she finally left, Ethan stayed behind, the echo of her presence lingering like static in the air. He realized then what kind of danger he was in, not the kind that could kill him, but the kind that could quietly rewrite him from the inside out. And somewhere down the hall, Dr. Mara Jensen walked toward her next patient, trying to ignore the fact that, for the first time in years, someone had made her feel alive again. There's a strange rhythm to the night shift, not just the beeping monitors or the slow drip of 4 bags, but the way time itself bends and folds until hours feel like breaths. Ethan learned that rhythm faster than anyone expected. By his second week at Steady Victoria Memorial, he had already memorized the sound of each floor, the low hum of the ICU, the anxious pacing in pediatrics, and the quiet, deliberate footsteps that always announced Dr. Mara Jensen before she even spoke. She wasn't like the others. Most doctors shouted, demanded, commanded the air around them. Mara didn't need to. Her silence was authority, her stillness power. But it was her stillness that terrified him most, because sometimes, when the hospital slowed down, the stillness felt like gravity pulling him in. It started small. A glance across the nurses' station when their shifts overlapped. A coffee left on the counter that neither of them admitted to bringing. Her voice calling, "Ward, with me," like it meant something more than procedure. They were careful, always careful, because hospitals are built on whispers, and secrets don't survive long under fluorescent light. But some connections don't need words to grow. They just need proximity. One night, around 2:40 am, the air was empty for the first time in hours. The storm outside had quieted. A single fluorescent light flickered above the nurse's desk, throwing shadows that stretched like memories. Ethan sat, half dozing over patient charts, when her voice cut through the silence. "You shouldn't fall asleep at work." He looked up, startled, and there she was, leaning against the doorway in her white coat, arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at her mouth. "Not sleeping," he said, sitting up. "Just resting your excuses?" she teased. He smiled. "That too." Mara stepped closer, the echo of her heels muted by the floor. "Quiet night," she said. "Almost unnerving." "Almost," she shrugged. "Peace usually means something's about to break." He studied her, the way her eyes drifted, not fearful, but cautious, like someone who'd seen peace shattered too many times before. "Do you ever stop?" he asked quietly. She frowned. "Stop what?" "Working, thinking, carrying everything." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, longer than it should have. Then she looked away. "Doctors don't get to stop, Ward. We just pause between emergencies." Later that same night, the pause broke. Code Blue ICU. They ran together, sprinting down the hall like gravity had let go. Room 204. A patient, elderly, cardiac failure. Mara took command instantly, calm and efficient, but Ethan could see the exhaustion beneath the precision. "Charge to 200. Clear." Shock. No response. Again, the room smelled of adrenaline and desperation. And in that chaos, he saw her for what she really was, not the untouchable surgeon the hospital whispered about, but a woman who refused to lose people, even when loss was inevitable. When it was over, the patient's pulse returned. The monitor steadied. The room exhaled. Mara leaned against the counter, pulling off her gloves. Her hands were shaking. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. He just stepped closer, quietly handing her a cup of water. She accepted it without a word, eyes distant. After a long moment, she said softly, "You remind me of someone I used to be." He frowned. That a compliment? Maybe a warning. That was the first time she let something slip, the faintest crack in the armor. He wanted to ask more, to understand, but before he could, a voice over the intercom called her name. "Duty, always duty." She set the cup down and walked away, but halfway through the door, she paused. "Ward," she said without turning. "Don't ever lose that look in your eyes." He blinked. "What look?" "The one that still believes we can save everyone." And then she was gone. The next morning, after the shift ended, Ethan found himself standing outside the hospital, watching the sunrise bleed into the clouds. The sky looked the same color as the light in her office, soft gray, with a promise of warmth that never quite reached the ground. He realized something then, that hospitals aren't just places where people fight for life. They're places where people quietly fall apart, and sometimes, if they're lucky, they find someone who makes the falling feel less lonely. Inside, on the 5th floor, Dr. Mara Jensen stood by her window, sipping stale coffee. Her husband, Dr. Lucas Jensen, would be home by now, probably asleep. She hadn't told him about the new nurse. She didn't know why she should have. It wasn't anything. Not yet. And still, when she thought of Ethan's eyes, the way he looked at her, not with admiration but with understanding, her pulse quickened in a way it hadn't in years. She whispered to herself, almost angrily, "This isn't what you came here for." But the echo that came back sounded a lot like the truth she didn't want to face. The hospital never truly slept. It just changed its breathing. The hum of machines was the heartbeat of steady. Victoria, constant, mechanical, indifferent. And yet, for Ethan, the nights had begun to feel strangely alive, because somewhere between the ticking monitors and the quiet footsteps, she was there. Dr. Mara Jensen, the still point in his endless, spinning world. Nurses whispered her name in awe. Residents straightened whenever she passed. Her surgical record was legendary: 12 years without a malpractice claim, a list of commendations long enough to fill a folder. She was everything the hospital expected its doctors to be: efficient, untouchable, unshakable. But Ethan had seen something they hadn't. He'd seen her hands tremble when no one was watching. He'd heard her voice soften when she spoke to dying patients. And he'd caught that flicker of loneliness behind her gray eyes, the kind that doesn't come from isolation, but from loving a world that doesn't love you back. Their conversations grew longer. Their silences grew heavier. Between midnight rounds and empty hallways, they found themselves talking about things that had nothing to do with medicine. About music, about faith, about why they stayed in a job that kept breaking them. He told her about his mother, who had worked double shifts in a nursing home for years until her heart gave out one winter morning. Mara listened, quiet, her eyes unreadable. When he finished, she said, "You remind me why I stopped looking at the clock." "What do you mean?" "When I was your age, I thought medicine was about saving lives. Now I think it's about holding on to the parts of yourself that the saving doesn't destroy." He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. And somewhere in that silence, something unspoken began to breathe. One night, a power outage swept through the hospital. For 30 seconds, the lights went black. Generators kicked in, slow and reluctant. When they came back, the world was dimmer, red emergency lights bleeding down the hallways like veins. Ethan was in the ICU, flashlight in hand, when he heard her voice behind him. "Of all the things that could fail, it's always the lights." He turned, and she was there, coat off, surgical cap in her hand, the soft glow painting her features in crimson shadow. "Guess it keeps us humble," he said. "Humility doesn't keep people alive," she replied. "No," he said quietly. "But it keeps us human." She smiled, then, not the professional kind, but the kind that starts somewhere deep in the ribs. "Maybe you're right, Ward, Ethan," he said before he could stop himself. She raised an eyebrow. "Ethan," she repeated slowly, like tasting a forbidden word. The lights flickered back to white, and just like that, the moment was gone, fragile as glass, shattering beneath the weight of normalcy. From then on, she started saying his name more often. Not Ward, not nurse, just Ethan. It shouldn't have meant anything, but in a place where everyone spoke in titles, it meant everything. Weeks passed. Night after night, they worked side by side, an unspoken rhythm forming between them. She'd reach for an instrument, and he'd already have it ready. He'd anticipate her moves in surgery before she spoke them. It was chemistry disguised as professionalism, and everyone noticed. Nurse Ramirez smirked whenever they crossed paths. Even Dr. Patel, her longtime colleague, raised an eyebrow one morning and said, "You've been smiling more lately, Mara. Did someone win the lottery or something?" "Something like that," she said, but the way her voice broke on the word something betrayed her. At home, Her husband noticed too. Late again? His tone wasn't angry, just empty. Double case, she replied, hanging her coat. He didn't look up from his laptop. Seems like you always have a double case lately. She poured a glass of wine. Didn't answer, didn't need to. Silence stretched between them, brittle and familiar. You used to love mornings, he said after a while. Now you only wake up for the night. She forced a smile. Maybe that's when I finally feel awake. He didn't understand. He wasn't supposed to. Back at the hospital, Ethan was fighting his own reflection. He told himself it was admiration, respect, gratitude, anything but what it really was. But when she brushed past him in the hallway, the scent of antiseptic and lavender clinging to her, the lie unraveled a little more each time. He tried to distance himself, to swap shifts, to avoid her rounds. It lasted less than a week, because some gravity can't be escaped. It just pulls, quiet and relentless. One night, during rounds, they found themselves in the pediatric wing. A little girl, post-op, couldn't sleep. Mara sat beside her bed, whispering softly until the child's breathing slowed. Ethan watched from the doorway, arms folded, the faintest ache in his chest. When Mara stood to leave, she noticed him. Their eyes met through the glass, a moment suspended, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She came closer. Why are you still here? She asked. Couldn't sleep, join the club. They both laughed quietly, a fragile sound in the sterile silence. For a moment, neither spoke. Just the hum of the machines, the slow rhythm of two hearts beating out of sync. Sometimes, she said softly, I wonder if I'm saving them, or if they're saving me. He swallowed. Maybe both. At 4:12 a.m., she walked away. At 4:13, he realized he'd never be able to forget her. And by the time the sun rose over the city, the vows they'd both sworn, his to serve, hers to heal, were already beginning to fracture. By the 4th month, Ethan had stopped pretending. He didn't count the hours until the night shift began. The rhythm of steady Victoria had woven itself into his veins, the hum of monitors, the smell of sterile gloves, the click of Mara's heels echoing down the hall before dawn. He told himself it was routine. It wasn't. Every night he told himself, tonight will be different. Every night, it wasn't. It was a Wednesday when the line began to blur. A multiple vehicle accident flooded the air for trauma cases, one cardiac arrest, and a child in critical condition. Mara was everywhere at once, barking orders, performing procedures, wiping blood from her face with the back of her glove. Ethan moved beside her instinctively, wordless and efficient, like he'd been designed to complement her chaos. Hours passed. The adrenaline burned off. And when the last patient stabilized, the two of them were left standing in the trauma bay, breathing the same air, heavy with disinfectant and fatigue. Her scrubs were streaked with blood that wasn't hers. Her hair was falling loose, framing her face in a way that made her look almost fragile. She leaned against the counter, exhaling. He passed her a bottle of water. Thanks, she murmured. He didn't answer. He was afraid his voice would betray too much. They stood in silence for a while, two professionals at the end of another endless night. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full, thick, waiting. Finally, she said, You did good tonight. You always say that, he replied. Because it's always true, he laughed quietly. You don't strike me as the kind of person who hands out praise so easily. I'm not, she said. Then, softer. But you make it hard not to. Her words hung there, suspended in the space between confession and control. He could feel his pulse hammering in his throat. It wasn't the exhaustion. It wasn't the adrenaline. It was her. Dr. Jensen, he began, but she cut him off. Mara, she said. He froze. What? Her gaze met his. If we're going to break rules just by standing here, we might as well drop the formalities. He almost smiled, but didn't. Then, Mara, she nodded once, as if she'd been waiting to hear her name in his voice. Outside, the storm that had rumbled all night finally broke. Rain streaked down the glass, the sound soft and rhythmic, like a second heartbeat. Do you ever wonder, he said, what your life would be like if you'd chosen differently? Her expression didn't change, but her voice did. Every day, He hesitated. Do you regret it? She took a long breath. Regret is a luxury. I made my choices. I stand by them, but you don't believe that, he said gently. She looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer. They were still standing there when the power flickered again. Not a full blackout this time, just a tremor in the lights, a heartbeat faltering, the universe holding its breath. For a moment, it was only them. The sterile world blurred out of focus. The distance between them, professional, moral, necessary, began to dissolve. Ethan's hand brushed hers. Accidentally, maybe. Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly. Ethan, she whispered, his name trembling between warning and surrender. He should have stepped back. She should have walked away. Neither did. Footsteps echoed down the hall, the world snapping back into existence. They jumped apart, the illusion breaking. A nurse entered, oblivious, asking about patient reports. Mara straightened her coat, voice steady again. Later, she said, not as a dismissal, but as a promise. Ethan nodded, even though he didn't know what later meant anymore. Later came faster than either expected. At an emergency cardiac arrest, room 307. They worked together again, seamless and silent. Ethan compressed the chest. Mara called the shocks. They moved like one organism, rhythm synced, purpose united. When the patient stabilized, they both froze, adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. Another one saved, Ethan said quietly. No, Mara said. Another one borrowed. She turned to leave but stumbled slightly, her knees buckling. He caught her before she fell, his hand steady on her arms. Their faces were inches apart. Her pulse fluttered against his fingers. And in that fragile instant, she wasn't Dr. Jensen, and he wasn't Nurse Ward. They were just two souls who'd been holding the world together for too long. She stepped back first, slowly, carefully, like diffusing a bomb. This can't happen, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes weren't. I know, do you? He nodded. Doesn't mean it won't. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, God help us. And then she walked away, not fast, not dramatic, just far enough that he couldn't follow. That night, neither of them went home when the shift ended. Ethan sat in the break room, watching the sunrise through fogged glass, trying to erase the warmth of her touch from his memory. Mara stood in her office, staring at her reflection in the window. She saw a doctor, a wife, a woman bound by vows she wasn't sure she still believed in. The sky outside was turning gold, but inside, she only saw gray. When her husband called that morning, she didn't answer, and when Ethan saw her again that evening, their eyes met for just a second too long, and in that look, the line they swore they'd never cross was already gone. Hospitals remember things, not in a mystical way, not with ghosts or echoes, but in the silence after the alarms, in the stains on the floor no one can quite wash out. Walls absorb stories. And lately, the walls of steady. Victoria had started whispering theirs. It had been 2 weeks since that night in the trauma bay. Neither Ethan nor Mara had spoken of what happened or almost happened, but everyone could feel it. The nurses sensed it in the way he waited a second too long when she gave orders. The residents noticed the way she called him by his first name, even in front of others. No one said anything, but hospitals, like people, have a pulse, and theirs was racing. One morning during rounds, she corrected him sharply in front of the staff, unnecessarily, almost cruelly. He froze, humiliated, but didn't argue. The others glanced at each other, uncomfortable. And when the round ended, Mara avoided his eyes and walked away as if she were fleeing something far bigger than him. That night, she found him in the supply room, organizing medications in silence. She didn't knock, just stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him. You can't look at me that way in front of them, she said. He turned quietly. I wasn't looking at you anyway. You were, he sighed. You humiliated me, Mara. Her expression didn't waver. I was protecting you. From what? From me. The words hit harder than he expected. There was nothing to say after that. Just silence, thick and heavy. She took a step inside. Ethan, if anyone suspects, they already do. her voice faltered. Then we're done. He stared at her, heart pounding. Are we? Her jaw tightened. We have to be. He nodded slowly, pretending to understand, pretending it was possible. Over the next few nights, the distance between them became unbearable. He stopped lingering near her station. She stopped calling his name during rounds. Every conversation became transactional, clipped, professional, cold. But it wasn't anger that filled the silence. It was grief, the quiet mourning of something neither of them had the courage to name. Then came the case that changed everything. A critical patient mid-40s, severe cerebral aneurysm. Surgery was risky, chances slim. Mara was assigned to lead the procedure. Ethan was on her team. He tried to switch shifts. The charge nurse refused. Fate, it seemed, had no intention of letting them escape each other. The operation began at 2:17 a.m. The air inside the OR was sharp with tension, not the usual kind that accompanies a high-stakes case, but something personal, fragile, unspoken. Ethan assisted mechanically, every motion rehearsed, careful not to brush against her. Mara's voice was steady, clinical, the kind of control that only comes from fear. Clamp, she ordered. Clamp, he echoed, handing it to her. Minutes turned to hours. At one point, the patient's vitals plummeted. The anesthesiologist shouted, BP dropping. 60/30, damn it, Mara muttered, moving fast. We're losing perfusion. Ethan glanced at the monitor, adrenaline flooding his system. Should we? I know what to do, she snapped, sharper than she meant to. Their eyes met over the sterile field, the distance between them both literal and unbearable. Sorry, she whispered. I didn't, it's okay, he said softly. Just tell me what you need. The tremor in her breath betrayed her composure. Don't let go. He didn't. The patient survived. Barely. But when they stepped out of the OR, neither felt relief. They were shaking from exhaustion, from restraint, from everything left unsaid. She leaned against the wall outside the scrub room. He approached slowly, gloves off, still trembling. You saved her, he said. Mara laughed bitterly. Sometimes I think I just delay the inevitable. Don't say that. Why not? She turned to him, eyes wet. Because I'm supposed to believe in miracles? Because I'm supposed to feel something? He stepped closer. Because you do, her lip trembled. Not anymore. Then why are you crying? That stopped her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world outside was silent except for the rain beginning again against the windows. It always seemed to rain when they broke. He wanted to touch her, to wipe the tears from her face, to take the weight she carried, but he didn't. Because he knew, if he did, there would be no going back. Ethan, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to stop this, he swallowed. Maybe we're not supposed to. She shook her head. You don't understand. I built a life out of rules, out of discipline. And then you, her breath hitched. You made me forget. He wanted to tell her it was the same for him, that every shift, every patient, every sleepless dawn, her face haunted the edges of his mind. But the words caught in his throat, because saying them would make them real, and real was dangerous. The intercom crackled overhead, another emergency, another life demanding their attention. Duty intruded like it always did. The moment vanished, leaving only the echo of what might have been. She composed herself, straightening her coat. Go, she said softly. You're needed, so are you. Their eyes met one last time. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the sterile corridor until the sound faded into silence. That night, after the chaos died, Ethan sat alone in the staff lounge, the clock ticking past and the city outside was waking. The light filtering through the blinds painted his hands gold. He stared at them, hands that had held lives, hands that almost reached for something forbidden. He thought of her words, of her tears, of everything they hadn't said. And he understood something then. Love in a hospital doesn't scream. It lingers, quietly, like the hum of a heart monitor, steady, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Hospitals were built to survive disasters, fires, floods, power outages, pandemics. But there's one thing no protocol ever accounts for: scandal. And scandals in hospitals don't explode. They spread, like infection. Silent at first, then feverish. It began with whispers. Two nurses in the break room, one rolling her eyes, the other pretending not to listen. A resident who paused just a little too long before saying Dr. Jensen's team. A head nurse who glanced between them during rounds and didn't bother hiding her suspicion. By the time the week ended, the story had already evolved from rumor to certainty, from curiosity to quiet judgment. They didn't know anything for sure, but they didn't need to. Hospitals are ecosystems of gossip, and Mara Jensen had become prey. Ethan noticed the shift first, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room, the looks exchanged behind clipboards, the sudden, awkward silences when Mara gave an order. He tried to shrug it off to stay professional, detached. But one evening, while reviewing a patient file at the nurse's station, he heard it clearly for the first time. Words doing well for himself, a voice whispered, "Guest doctor." Jensen has her favorites, laughter, soft, cruel, surgical. He turned. The laughter died instantly. His voice was calm. "You got something to say?" The younger nurse hesitated, then muttered, "Just an observation." "Then observe quietly," he said, his tone clipped. "Before I file a report." She scoffed but didn't respond. Still, the damage was done not to his reputation, but to the invisible thread that tied them, the one built on trust and secrecy. That night, Mara found him on the rooftop between shifts, the only place in the hospital where the air didn't smell like antiseptic and regret. He stood by the railing, city lights bleeding through the fog. When she appeared beside him, he didn't turn. "I heard," she said softly. He laughed, bitter and tired. "Of course you did. I'll handle it." "How?" He looked at her then, eyes hollow. "By pretending it doesn't exist?" "Like we don't," her silence answered for her. "Mara," he said, voice low, "I can take being judged. But I won't let them drag you down with me." "They won't. They already are." She stepped closer. "You think this is about me?" "It's always about you," he said, almost angrily. "Everything in this place is. You're their hero, their symbol of control. And now you're human, and they can't stand it." Her voice cracked. "Ethan, stop. No, you don't get to hide behind rules and titles anymore. Not with me." The air between them pulsed electric, dangerous. She swallowed hard. "You think I don't feel it? You think this doesn't terrify me?" "Then why?" "Because I can't lose this," she said suddenly, gesturing at the skyline, the hospital behind them. "This is all I have. This job, this name, it's everything I built after losing myself once before." He stared at her. "And what if you're losing yourself again?" She had no answer. The next day, a formal email arrived in her inbox. Subject: Inquiry allegations of unprofessional conduct. She read it twice, the words blurring. Someone anonymous had filed a complaint. No details, no names, just inappropriate relationship with subordinate staff. Her hands trembled on the keyboard. By afternoon, the entire department knew. The hospital administration called her in. A glass-walled conference room too bright to clean. 2 board members. One HR officer with a polite smile that felt like a scalpel. "Dr. Jensen," one began, "you understand why you're here?" She nodded. "I do. We've received a report. We're obligated to investigate." "This isn't disciplinary." "Not yet." Her stomach twisted. "Not yet. We'll need to review your recent schedules, case assignments, communication logs, and patient outcomes involving Mr. Ward." "Understood," she said, voice steady. It wasn't until they said Mr. Ward that her resolve wavered. They weren't just investigating her, they were investigating him. That night, she found him waiting outside the hospital, under the flickering streetlight near the staff entrance. He looked exhausted, eyes sunken, jaw tense, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "They're coming for you," he said before she could speak. "I know. Let me take the blame." She froze. "What?" He stepped closer. "I'll say I misread things. That I crossed a line. You'll be cleared." "No," her voice was sharp. "You won't destroy your career for mine." He smiled sadly. "You already did that for me, For a moment, neither breathed. "Ethan, Mara, please. I can survive this." "You can't." The sound of his name on her lips broke him. He reached for her hand, hesitating only a second before their fingers touched. No one saw, but even if they had, it wouldn't have mattered anymore. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Every second," she said. Then softer, "And not at all." Her tears glimmered in the streetlight, catching like raindrops on glass. He wanted to wipe them away, to hold her, but she pulled back. "You have to keep your head down," she said. "Don't fight this. Don't speak to anyone, and you?" "I'll face them. You'll lose everything." She smiled, weary and beautiful. "Maybe it's time I do." The next morning, Mara walked into the administrative boardroom wearing her lab coat like armor, her hair tied back, her expression calm. But her pulse steady on the monitor in her pocket told another story. When the questions began, she answered with grace. When they asked about Ethan, she hesitated just for a heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, the truth she'd fought to suppress finally took shape. Outside, in the waiting corridor, Ethan sat with his head in his hands. Every second stretched like a lifetime. He could hear faint voices behind the door, the muffled rhythm of her defense. He wished he could burst in, confess, protect her, but she'd made him promise and he kept his promises. It's what love becomes when the world forbids it. Not a confession, but a sacrifice. Hours later, she emerged. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. He stood, searching her expression. "Well?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "They're still deciding. How long?" "Until morning," he nodded. And then, in the quiet space between their breaths, she whispered, "Whatever happens, Ethan, don't stop being who you are." He wanted to tell her she was the reason he'd ever known who that was, but words failed. Instead, he reached out, brushing her sleeve the briefest, most human touch. And for that heartbeat in time, the world stopped pretending to be sterile. That night, neither of them slept. Mara sat in her office, staring at her reflection, a doctor, a leader, a woman undone by the one thing she never planned for, feeling. Ethan watched the city from his small apartment window, replaying every moment they hadn't said out loud. And somewhere, beneath the hum of the hospital lights, both of them wondered the same thing. When does duty end? And when does love begin? Morning came slow, gray, heavy, uncertain. The kind of dawn that feels more like an aftermath than a beginning. St. Victoria Memorial stood still, like it too was holding its breath. The corridors were quieter than usual. No chatter, no laughter, just the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the faint echo of a truth no one wanted to name. By everyone knew. Dr. Mara Jensen was suspended pending investigation. No surgery privileges, no patient contact, just an indefinite leave of absence until further notice. The official memo was brief, clinical, bloodless, but everyone understood what it meant. The whispers that once slithered in shadows now walked the halls openly. Some pitied her, some judged her. Most just watched the way people do when tragedy unfolds in slow motion. Ethan saw the announcement on the bulletin board before she called him. He didn't need to read it twice. The phone rang at 9:32. He answered on the first ring. "Don't come here," she said. Her voice was low, calm to calm. "Mara, they're looking for you too. You'll be questioned." "I don't care, you should." He hesitated. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," she said. "That there was nothing inappropriate," he exhaled. "That's not the truth." "No," she said softly. "It's the one that still saves you." By noon, he was called into the same sterile room, the same polite smiles. Only this time, he didn't feel small. He felt furious. "Mr. Ward," one of the board members began, "we're reviewing your conduct and correspondence with Dr. Jensen. We appreciate your cooperation." Ethan folded his hands on the table. "You've already decided what to believe. That's not, you suspended one of the best surgeons in this state based on gossip. Don't pretend this is about professionalism." The HR officer smiled thinly. "You're very passionate about this." "I'm passionate about truth," he snapped. "And yet," she said, You seem to be the only one defending her. That silence, cold, precise, was her victory. He said nothing after that. When the questioning ended, Ethan went straight to her house. He shouldn't have. It was reckless, stupid, dangerous. But he couldn't let the last thing between them be a lie. She opened the door slowly. No lab coat, no stethoscope, just a woman, stripped of all the armor the world had demanded she wear. Her eyes were red but dry, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. You shouldn't be here. He stepped inside. I had to be. Ethan, they're tearing you apart for something that wasn't even real. She looked up sharply. Wasn't it? That stopped him. Completely. I told them it wasn't, she continued. But every time I said it, it felt like I was erasing something sacred. He moved closer, voice barely above a whisper. Then why erase it? Because I have nothing left to give it. Her breath shook. My reputation is gone. My career is hanging by a thread. My marriage. She laughed softly, bitterly. That was over long before you. He wanted to say something, anything. But all he could do was look at her, at the woman he'd fallen for in the quiet chaos of the night shift, and wonder if loving her had ever been an act of kindness or cruelty. They stood in silence until she said, I'm leaving. What do you mean? I turned in my resignation this morning. Effective immediately. He stared at her. You can't. I can. I did. Mara, that hospital is you. Exactly, she said. And I don't want to live somewhere I have to amputate my humanity to survive. He took a step closer. Then stay. Fight. For what? She whispered. For people who'll never forgive me for being human? He shook his head. No, for me. The words slipped out before he could stop them. The air between them changed, not fragile this time, but raw, trembling with years of unsaid things. She looked at him, eyes shimmering. Ethan, you don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. Do you? She said. You're young, idealistic. You think love is enough to build a life on. He took her hand slowly, deliberately. It's enough to start one, and for a moment, just one, she let herself believe him. The distance collapsed. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling, hearts racing in sync like monitors before the code blew. He whispered, tell me to stop. She didn't. Because she couldn't. But when his lips brushed hers, the barest ghost of a kiss, she pulled away. Don't, she said, voice breaking. If we start this, it doesn't end. It destroys everything. He nodded, chest tight. Maybe everything needs to be destroyed. Tears finally fell. You don't mean that. I do. No, she whispered, stepping back. You'll wake up one day and hate me for it. I could never. Yes, you could. Because I already hate myself. The room went still. Neither spoke, neither moved. Only the rain started again outside, tapping softly against the glass, the same rhythm that had haunted every turning point of their story. She turned away, wiping her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was hollow. You have to let me go. He shook his head. I can't. You have to, Ethan. He exhaled, a sound halfway between surrender and heartbreak. And then, quietly, will you tell me goodbye? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached up and touched his face, the kind of touch meant to memorize, not to promise. Goodbye, she whispered finally. And then she walked away. Ethan stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading through the house. When the door closed, something inside him did too. He left a few minutes later, coat soaked, shoes heavy with rain. The hospital lights blinked in the distance, the same ones where they'd met, where they'd laughed, where they'd crossed every line they shouldn't have. It looked smaller now, just another building trying to hold too many broken hearts inside. By midnight, Mara's resignation email circulated. Her office light was off for the first time in years. Her nameplate had already been removed. And yet, down in the air, when Ethan heard a monitor beep, that steady, fragile pulse of life, he still thought of her, of everything she taught him, of everything she'd lost to teach it. Because love, he realized, doesn't always survive its own truth. Sometimes it simply leaves its mark, quiet, permanent, unhealed. Like a scar no one dares to touch. And as dawn broke again over Steety, Victoria, Ethan whispered to himself, some vows aren't meant to be broken, just lived in silence. Time doesn't heal, it hides. And inside hospitals where clocks never stop and walls forget nothing, hiding is just another kind of remembering. It had been almost 6 months since Dr. Mara Jensen walked out of Steety Victoria Memorial. Her name still appeared on old patient charts, on archived surgery reports, on the lips of those who used to work under her, whispered like a secret that once mattered. But the world, as it always does, moved on. New doctors filled her place. New protocols were written. New scandals replaced the old ones. And yet, every night, when the hallways quieted and the lights dimmed to that soft, artificial blue, Ethan could still feel her presence in the air, like a heartbeat that had learned to exist without a body. He had stayed, against advice, against instinct, against the part of him that wanted to burn it all down. He stayed. He told himself it was for the patients, for the work, for the sense of purpose she had helped him find. But deep down, he knew, he stayed because leaving would mean letting her vanish completely, and he couldn't do that, not yet. Every corner of the hospital carried a memory. The trauma bay where they first stood side by side, adrenaline pulsing through silence. The supply room where her voice cracked for the first time. The rooftop where she said, God help us. Each space felt both haunted and sacred. Sometimes, during the night shift, he would catch a reflection in a window, just light, just shadow, and his heart would betray him for half a second. He'd turn, expecting to see her. Of course, she wasn't there, but for that half second, he could breathe again. Life became routine, the cruel kind that pretends to be healing. Work, sleep, repeat. He avoided small talk, declined after-shift drinks, spent most mornings walking the empty halls while the city woke outside. The only thing that broke the monotony came one spring morning, a letter. Plain envelope, no return address, just his name, written in the handwriting he'd memorized during chart reviews and post-op notes. He didn't open it at first. He let it sit on his desk for hours, afraid that the words inside would ruin the delicate equilibrium he'd built, the illusion that silence meant peace. When he finally unfolded the paper, her words were simple. Ethan, I've started again. Different city. Different name on the coat. I tell myself this is redemption, but it feels more like exile. I wanted you to know I'm okay. I think of you often, not with regret, but with the quiet gratitude of someone who once saw themselves clearly in another soul. Keep your heart open. That's what made you dangerous, and what made you good. He read it once, then again, then folded it carefully, as if it were fragile, and placed it inside his badge holder right behind his ID. Close enough to carry, invisible enough to hide. Months turned into years. Ethan became senior nurse supervisor. His colleagues respected him. Patients loved him. But no one really knew him. Every so often, he caught himself giving advice to interns the way she used to. Short, quiet, unfiltered. He'd say things like, don't forget the person under the chart, or sometimes saving a life means just holding a hand. And when they asked where he learned that, he'd smile and say, from someone who taught me how to listen. There were nights, rare, but real, when he wondered where she was, if she'd remarried, if she ever looked back, if she still carried the same guilt, or if time had finally let her rest. He didn't write back. He didn't need to, because some goodbyes are entire conversations. One winter evening, a nurse mentioned her name during a staff meeting casually, without venom. Dr. Jensen's surgical protocols are still used at Mercy General, she said. They're brilliant, Ethan smiled faintly. For the first time, hearing her name didn't ache. It warmed. Maybe that was what healing really was, not forgetting, but remembering without bleeding. Years later, long after his hair had grayed and his hands had grown slower, he found himself sitting on the same rooftop where they once stood, watching the city lights pulse like distant heartbeats. Below, the hospital still buzzed, a living thing of metal and mercy. Inside, lives were being saved, promises kept, vows tested. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. He closed his eyes and listened to the night, the rhythm of machines, the whisper of wind, the faint hum of something eternal. And in that sound, he swore he could still hear her voice, steady, calm, compassionate, saying, "Don't lose that look in your eyes." He smiled then, a small, tired smile. Because he hadn't. Not really, not even after everything. The world would never know their story, the nights, the silences, the love that dared not exist. But he would, and that was enough. When he finally stood to leave, dawn was breaking, light spilling over the horizon, soft and gold, like the beginning of something new. The same light that once caught in her hair, the same warmth that had never quite left him. He whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Mara." And somewhere, in the hum of the waking hospital, a monitor beeped, one steady, alive, as if answering back.